Greetings and welcome to everyone watching our presentation for Constitutional and Administrative Law 2. We will be presenting today about the suffrage movement and voting rights. I will be accompanied by Myra, Vishan, Chetan, Karhoy, and Francis. So today we will delve into the historical context of voting rights in the UK, explore key legal reforms, and provide a comparative analysis with the US suffrage movement. Historically, voting rights in the UK were limited to wealthy landowners and men of high social standing. Initially, voting was restricted to men who owned property of certain value, excluding a large portion of the population. Economic changes and growing demands for political representation during the Industrial Revolution set the stage for significant legal reforms, starting with the Reform Act of 1832. Now let's delve into the scholarly insights on women's contribution during World War One to get a greater understanding of what role the women played in the suffrage movement. The article The War from Within German Working Class Women in the First World War, translated by Margaret Rees, provides a comprehensive analysis of the role of German working class women during World War One and their impact on the social political landscape. This study explores how these women's involvement in the workforce and their contributions to the effort led to significant changes in societal perceptions and political rights. Although focused on Germany, the insights from this article highlight similar dynamics in other countries, including Britain, where the war played a crucial role in expanding voting rights and redefining citizenship. This scholarly source is essential for understanding the broader social and political implications of World War One, particularly how it facilitated the extension of voting rights to men and women. Now let's delve into the social background leading to the suffrage movement. The suffrage movement was driven by significant social and economic changes. Industrialization led to urbanization and an increase in the working class, who along with women were excluded from the political process. This growing political consciousness among disfranchised groups, including demands for better labor rights and political representation, created a fertile ground for the suffrage movement. So, what are the key social drivers of the suffrage movement? Well, there are several key factors contributed to the rise of the suffrage movement. The glaring inequalities in political representation and labor rights spurred demands for change. Early advocacy from movements like the Chartists, who called for universal male suffrage and equal representation, inspired further demands for inclusive political participation and set the stage for more organized efforts to secure voting rights for both men and women. Now let's delve into the scholarly insights on women's suffrage. The journal article defining militancy, radical protest, the constitutional item, and women's suffrage in Britain 1908 to 1909 by Laura E. Nye Mayhall explores the strategies and rhetorics used by the women's suffrage movement in Britain to advocate their cause. Mayhall examines how militant tactics combined with deep engagement with constitutional principles helped to redefine the boundaries of acceptable political protest and brought significant attention to the suffrage movement. This scholarly source provides critical insights into how radical actions and constitutional arguments were employed to challenge the status quo and push for women's voting rights. By utilizing such detailed academic research, we gain a comprehensive understanding of the complexities and dynamics that shaped the suffrage movement. Early movements such as the Chartist movement, which advocated for universal male suffrage and equal representation, played a significant role in pushing for political reform. Concurrently, women's rights organizations emerged to advocate for political rights, laying the groundwork for the broader suffrage movement. The Representation of the People Act of 1928 finally equalized voting rights for men and women, setting the minimum age at 21 for both genders. So now let's delve into the analysis of suffrage movements. The suffrage movements for men and women faced significant challenges and opposition but achieved key milestones that have shaped modern democratic principles. The men's suffrage movement expanded voting rights to include working class men, while the women's movement focused on securing equal political participation. Together, these movements paved the way for universal suffrage and the principles for equality and representation that we uphold today. Now, let's have a little overview on what modern relevance has the suffrage movement had. The suffrage movement have had a lasting impact on modern democratic practices, emphasizing the importance of inclusive political participation. The principles established by these movements continue to influence contemporary debates on voting rights and social justice, highlighting the ongoing need to protect and expand democratic freedom. In conclusion, the historical and social context of the suffrage movements highlighted the evolution of voting rights and the importance of continuous advocacy for political equality. These movements have shaped modern democratic practices and underscore the need for ongoing efforts to protect and expand voting rights for all citizens. Reflecting on these struggles reinforces the value of inclusive political participation and the principles of democracy.
Hello, my name is Myra Jane, and I will be discussing the historical foreground for universal suffrage in England, beginning with the 19th century laws and post 19th century laws. The English political system in the early 19th century was dominated by a select elite, namely a white male landed gentry, as suffrage at that time was closely tied to land ownership. So the Great Reform Act of 1832 represents a seminal moment in universal suffrage. This act extended the franchise to a greater population of the male populace, particularly the rising middle class. So, by redistributing seats in the House of Commons, it accorded a representation to a burgeoning industrial towns all over the UK, previously disenfranchised. It is important to note that also, while the middle class men were more enfranchised, it did not include working class men, as they fell short of the criterion that now included small landowners, tenant farmers, shopkeepers, and householders who pay a yearly rental of £10 or more and some others. So, this bill was also the first time that women were formally barred from voting, as the act defined a voter as a male person. So, although this act fell short of establishing universal suffrage, it was a crucial step in acknowledging the necessity for a more representative parliamentary system. So, the Reform Act of 1867, also known as the Second Reform Act, further broadened the electorate. It significantly reduced property qualifications, thereby enfranchising a substantial segment of the urban working class. The Act roughly doubled the electorate in England and Wales from 1 to 2 million men. So, still, women were not extended the same right to vote. But simultaneously, just a year later, the case of Charlton and Lings in 1968 addressed the critical issue of electoral rights. It was argued that the semantics of the 1867 Act included women by default by using the word man. So, however, the courts rejected this, and this case underscored the legal obstacles confronting women's suffrage. It catalyzed women's suffrage movement, highlighting the urgent need for legislative interventions to dismantle gender-based electoral discrimination. The culmination of these progressive efforts was realized with the enactment of the Representation of the People Act 1918. So, this landmark legislation was a direct response to the profound societal transformations precipitated by the First World War. It enfranchised all men over the age of 21 and women over the age of 30 who met minimal property qualifications. So, this act significantly expanded the electorate, enfranchising approximately 8.4 million women, thereby marking a historic advancement in the quest for gender equality in the electoral process. So, the subsequent Representation of the People Act 1928 further extended voting rights. Granting suffrage to all women over the age of 21, thus achieving universal gender suffrage in the United Kingdom. Now, with the historical foreground in mind, in contemporary times, the evolution of suffrage continued with significant legislative measures, such as the Representation of the People Act 1983 and the Representation of the People Act 2000. So, the 1983 Act actually consolidated previous electoral laws, modernizing the legal framework governing elections and ensuring greater clarity and efficiency in the electoral process. It addressed various aspects, including electoral registration, the conduct of elections, and the regulation of political donations. So, the Representation of the People Act 2000 introduced further reforms, notably allowing postal voting on demand and simplifying voter registration procedures. So, these changes have enhanced accessibility and inclusivity in the electoral process, reflecting ongoing efforts to adapt the democratic system to contemporary needs and ensuring that the right to vote is more widely exercised. So, from the Great Reform Act of 1832 to the Transformative Representation of the People's Act 1918 and 1928, and continuing with the modernization reforms of 1983 and 2000, each legislative and judicial milestone has been instrumental in broadening the electorate and ensuring the inclusivity of our democratic processes. So, thank you. That is all from my part. I will now pass the time on to my next groupmate. Thank you.
Greetings to anyone watching this presentation. My name is Nye Chi Ten, and I will be talking about the analysis of key statutes. So, let us start. The Second Reform Act 1867 was one of the most significant and important political reform in British history. This is because it brought a basically democratic franchise to the English boroughs. It also gave the middle class and urban working class a major role in politics. The electorate was almost doubled due to the addition of an estimated of 938,000 voters to the 1 million who was already eligible to vote. This was done by extending votes to lodgers and householders who pay at least £10 in rent per year or more. It also enabled tenants and landowners who held small amount of land to vote due to the lowered property threshold. The Third Reform Act 1884, on the other hand, has provided franchise equalization for both counties and boroughs. This act increased the electorate to approximately 5.5 million men, as approximately 2 in 3 men now had the right to vote. It also included some provisions to standardize voter qualifications, focusing on householders and lodgers. The following year, the Redistribution of Seats Act 1885, which is often associated with the 1884 Act, was introduced. This act drew boundaries for electoral districts to be more equal. Most of the areas only had 1 member of parliament since the passing of the act. Lastly, according to an article by Robert Blackburn, the Representation of the People's Act 1918 has brought many changes. This act mainly aimed to equalize the size of constituencies, making representation more equitable. Section 1 of the Act states that a man is eligible to be an elector if he is of full age, which is 21 years old, while Section 5 of the Act allowed men aged 19 and above who served in World War I to vote also. Section 4 of the Act gave the same powers to women, however, at a higher age than men, which is 30, who met minimum property qualifications. So, that's all from me. So, let me pass it on to my next groupmate. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Kahui and I'll be talking about the Representation of the People Equal Franchise Act 1928. The Representation of the People Equal Franchise Act 1928 is a watershed moment in a British legislative history, as it completed the path to equal suffrage by providing voting rights to all women over the age of 21. This act represented the conclusion of decades of persistent work by suffragists and suffragettes who fought vigorously for equal voting rights alongside men. By giving suffrage to these women, the act increased the electorate by 5 million people, establishing the fundamental premise of universal adult suffrage in the United Kingdom. Before the 1928 Act, judicial fights and interpretations of previous legislation changed the landscape of suffrage rights. Charlton against Links was a very noteworthy case. It challenged the exclusion of women from the electorate under the Representation of People Act of 1867, contending that the term man should include women as well. However, the Court of Common Pleas rejected this view, ruling that the Act clearly excluded women. This ruling highlighted the legal difficulties that women confront in their quest for suffrage and the importance of explicit legislative measures to achieve gender equality in voting rights. In a more recent decision, R on the application of Coughlin against Minister of Cabinet Office 2022, addressed current election law concerns. It specifically examined the legitimacy of voter ID restrictions enacted by the Elections Act 2022. While the objective behind these measures was to strengthen voting integrity, the Supreme Court considered whether they disproportionately impacted vulnerable populations, potentially disenfranchising them. The court's decision highlighted the constant problem of balancing electoral security and inclusion, reflecting the changing nature of voting rights and the need to uphold the democratic norm. In summary, the Representation of People Equal Franchise Act of 1928 and the judicial cases involving suffrage rights provide a path towards universal suffrage in the United Kingdom. They emphasize both historical milestones gained through sustained activism and continuing legal battles, shaping election legislation to preserve fairness and inclusivity in the democratic process. Thank you.
My name is Frances, and I'll be presenting my part now. Emerged in the late 19th to the early 20th century, the UK suffrage movement advocated for women's voting rights. Key organizations included the NUWSS, which was led by Millicent Fawcett, and the WSPU, which was led by Emmeline Pankhurst. The National Union of Women Suffrage Societies, NUWSS for short, was founded in 1897 by the merger of two existing societies. It was led by Millicent Fawcett, which focused on a democratic and peaceful approach, aiming to achieve women's suffrage through legal means. The Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU for short, on the other hand, was known for its hostile and violent tactics, including illegal demonstrations and protests, chemical attacks and arsons, and when members were arrested by the police, they would often coordinate hunger strikes in jail. It was founded in 1903 and led by Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughters, Christabel and Sylvia. The US suffrage movement began mid-19th century, which focused on women's rights. Key figures included Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Several organizations, including the NAWSA, which was led by Carrie Chapman Catt, and the National Women's Party, led by Alice Paul, also contributed significantly towards the movement. The National Women's Party was formed in 1913 by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns. It was inspired by WSPU in UK when Alice Paul was studying in London for her degree in sociology and economics. They prioritized a constitutional amendment for women's suffrage throughout the states. The National Women's Suffrage Association, NWSA, was formed in May 15, 1869. It was founded by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, which worked primarily at the federal level for campaigning women's right to vote. The American Women's Suffrage Association, AWSA, was formed in 1869, with Lucy Stone being its most prominent leader. They advocated for citizens' rights to vote, regardless of race or sex. Unlike the previous group mentioned, which also focused on other social rights issues, The AWSA focused on women's suffrage only. The National American Woman Suffrage Association, (NAWSA), was created by the merger of the two existing organizations mentioned prior on February 18, 1890. They concentrated on the state suffrage campaigns and was led by Susan B. Anthony, with Carrie Chapman Cairn taking over the president position after her retirement. The Representation of the People's Act 1918 granted partial suffrage for women over 30. 10 years later, the Representation of the People's Act 1928 granted full suffrage for women over 21, achieving a huge legal milestone in the United Kingdom for women's suffrage. In the year of 1920, the 19th Amendment was added into the Constitution of the United States of America, granting women nationwide suffrage. Later in 1964, the Civil Rights Act further reinforced voting rights protection. This was a huge legal milestone in the United States of America. If we were to draw a comparative analysis between both countries' suffrage movement, we can see that they both faced oppositions and used both peaceful and violent tactics. They were also both influenced by broader social movements. However, a key difference is that the UK achieved suffrage through legislative changes, while the US achieved suffrage through constitutional amendment. The suffrage movement in the United States also focused on non-violent tactics, while the United Kingdom was often a mixture of both violent and peaceful approaches. That is my presentation, and I'll be passing the mic to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Greetings to everyone who is watching this presentation. My name is Lim Wei Shen, and today I'm going to talk about the overview of UK's legal milestone and also the impacts on today's voting rights and representations. So firstly, about Magna Carta in 1215. It established that the principle that the monarch's power was limited, laying the groundwork for constitutional governance. Reform Act 1832 initiated a shift towards a more representative parliamentary system by abolishing bloated broads and extending voting rights to property-owning men. Representation of the People's Act 1918 expanded voting rights to all men over 21 and women over 30 with proper qualifications, significantly enlarging the electoral rate and advancing gender equality. Representation of the People's Act 1928 achieved universal suffrage by granting equal writing votes to all men and women by the age of 21 and over. Representation of the People's Act 1969 lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, acknowledging that the political maturity of young adults. Human Rights Act 1998 incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law, protecting voting rights and also addressing issues like the blanket ban on prisoner voting. Equality Act 2010, it strengthens the anti-discrimination law and promoting equality in electoral processes and ensuring fair representation. The summary of this is that the journey of the UK's voting rights and representation has been shaped by significant legal milestones, starting with the Magna Carta in 1215. The evolution continued with the Reform Act 1832, which expanded the electorates and set the stage for modern democratic governments. The representation of the People's Act 1918, also 1928, they progressively extended voting rights to broader segments of the population by culminating in universal suffrage. The 1969 Act further lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, which acknowledging the political maturing of young citizens. The Human Rights Act 1998 and also Equality Act 2010 further safeguards voting rights by incorporating international human rights standards and also by promoting anti-discriminations. Collectively, these milestones have been established a more inclusive and representative electoral system in the United Kingdom. Is to ensuring that all citizens at the age of 18 and above can participate in free and fair elections. The legal protection and judicial oversights continue to uphold and enhance of these democratic principles. Also, by making the right to vote a fundamental aspect of the UK in democracy. The conclusion is that finally the UK suffrage movement was influenced by a variety of social political forces, which it resulting in importance of voting rights, and also during the 1990s, also in the early 20s. The Second Reform Act 1967, Third Reform Act 1884, and Representation of the People's Act 1990, 1918 and 1928 were all significant milestones, since they gradually extended the electorate to include more males and subsequently provide females for equal voting rights. These revisions were backed by significant case law in comparison of the US suffrage campaign, which witnesses substantial breakthrough as long as the 19th Amendment in the United Kingdom legislation milestone also had a significant influence on the current voting rights and political representation. That's all from me. Thank you.